Clap one on three. One, two, three. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're so glad that you're here. As always, I am your host, Lauren Ash, and as always, I am joined by my co-hostess with the mostess, Christy Oxborrow. How you feeling?
Oh, I'm over the moon.
Over the moon.
I'm doing great. Doing great.
This is because of the hockey.
This is because of the hockey. Yeah. Because I mean,
Canada beat the
technically,
United States.
as of last night, that's when that happened compared to, when we're recording this. But yeah, what a game.
Now,
What a series. What a beautiful amount of hockey.
now forgive me because I don't follow such things. Um,
Nor you shouldn't have to.
did Canada win the whole tourney?
Yes,
Okay.
because there was only the four teams.
Right. So what was
Um,
that? Like a round robin situation?
yes. So there, everybody played everybody, and then if 3 points for a win, and then like two for an overtime win down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was basically the two who had the most did a championship game, and that was that. And we played Canada, or we played US the first time and lost, and then we beat Finland, we beat Sweden, and then US beat Finland and lost to Sweden, which I am
Oh,
very fucking proud of that game because the goalie in that game was my Sammy Ersson from the Philadelphia Flyers. So I was over the moon and so fucking proud to see him do that. Um, and then it just turned into a Canada US final. And I didn't know we needed it until I watched that puck just right into that net. And then the scream that left my body. I at that point, like it was like 10:30 at night. I had children in bed, and I screamed in a way that was, I mean, I've seen so many clips of different like bars throughout the country that were, everyone was watching the game, and the amount of screaming was so loud, like the mics like were cutting out because they just could not pick up that level of sound. I was elated.
how beautiful.
It was a beautiful thing, and it was amazing hockey to watch. I'll say it.
Yeah,
'Cause normally it's all-star, and
right.
it's like, it's fine, but it's for laughs, and it's like we're all jokey and we don't care. This time we cared.
Well,
Everybody
yeah, yeah.
cared, and
When
well,
when you get
especially now.
patriotism and bringing in
Yeah,
people's countries and whatnot, like the Olympics, yeah, I think it elevates the vibe for sure. And certainly
yeah.
right now more than ever.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There was a lot of, dare I say, tension. Yeah, it was bad. It
Tension
was
is a
bad.
a fair comment to make when, the president of a country is consistently threatening to take over another sovereign nation. Yeah, I'd say it would be called tension for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like I wanted them to win in my heart. Because I mean, not only is this my country, it's also got it had two players from my Flyers on it, which I have a bone to pick because I know they have to have a little extra for players. You've got to worry about injuries and things like that, so you have to have a little extra. So not everybody gets to play.
Right.
You're going to have a couple healthy scratches. I mean, you're going to have one goalie gets healthy scratched every game, two defensemen, I think, and one forward. And unfortunately, out of the four games, one of my guys got scratched twice, and I
Mm.
was livid. One other, like a defenseman got scratched twice, and I feel bad for him. But I was like, there's no reason my guy should have been scratched twice. You could have scratched somebody else.
You scratch my back. That's not
Thank you
necessary.
so much. Yes,
It's not necessary.
look, I get it. The once, fine, I get it. It was his time. But to do it twice
Yeah.
was a slap in his face and a slap in my face.
Yeah.
And I was so mad. But it's also so funny because now, like the way I screamed when Connor McDavid put that puck in the net, it was like just a textbook fucking shot. Uh, the amount that I screamed for him, and knowing that happened last night, tomorrow for me, Connor McDavid plays my fucking team. And so now I have to get that energy back of like, now I don't want Connor McDavid to
Of
score.
course.
But my God, I became another person
I
when
get
that
that.
puck went past. Of course, it went into overtime, which I'm not good with overtime because I just spend the whole time just going, oh, because I don't like a sudden death because if my team gets scored on, I want to know they have a chance to come back. Then I'll spend the rest of the game going until they do come back. But
Right.
it's sudden death. I can't take it. I can't. And I was so nervous and just sick about it. And then he put that puck in the net, and I went full Mother Laurel and just screamed, Connor McDavid, you son of a bitch. I was so proud of him. So proud of that team. Beautiful. Beautiful. It's beautiful to see players that normally play on different teams working together. By
Yes.
the end of that tourney, if I may, they really became a beautiful machine working together.
I love that.
I think all the teams did really well. I thought it was amazing hockey to watch. It was better than an all-star game.
I mean, I think that's fantastic.
I mean, I think it's why now they're going to start doing a World Cup of hockey,
Right.
which I'm like, I think World Cup is taken.
Well, yeah.
I'm sure we could call it something else, but either way. But hey, it'll have more countries in it, and that's a beautiful thing. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I can't wait. I mean, I've said repeat at least 5 times during every single game that I watched, which was almost all of them, except for one, I think. Every single time I was just like, I can't wait for the Olympics.
Yeah.
And then I started watching old videos of Scott and Tessa doing figure skating at the Olympics and full cried. I cried at knowing that they're retired. I cried at their beautiful chemistry. I cried at the idea that they aren't an actual couple. She's married to like a Toronto Maple Leaf.
Right.
And I was devastated because they had it. And I just really thought that was something. And wow.
What I'm
Yeah,
hearing is an emotional journey.
it is.
Yeah.
It is. I think I also just need some sort of mental vacation. I think because I think I'm mentally broken at this
From this
point.
from the state of the world,
Probably.
or just the pending president of the United States talking repeatedly about taking over Canada.
That I don't love. That I don't love. No, I knew there was a problem because I don't know if you've ever seen it. We watched the 1986 gem Manhunter,
I don't think I have.
which essentially is like the first movie that Hannibal Lecter's ever in.
Oh,
It's
okay.
kind of like a prequel to Silence of the Lambs, but at the same time, it's almost like it doesn't exist in Silence of the Lambs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's the same kind of deal where like a cop is basically going to Hannibal Lecter's cell and being like, I need you to help me find this serial killer. And Hannibal Lecter in this one is in this like pristine white cell, a plush mattress. He's laying, he's got his feet up, he's got a shelf full of books. There's nobody around him. He's on his own, he's in his own thing. You have to like go down a hall to get to his thing. It's so isolated. And I just said to my husband, I was like, that looks nice. Like, what do you have to do to get that? Like, not like death row, not like prison where I'm like sharing a cell with somebody. Like, what do I got to do? How twisted does it have to be where they're like scared of me that I get my own isolated thing? But I'm like, he probably just reads all day.
Right.
And that was the moment that I went, God, Hannibal Lecter, living the dream. That was the moment. I'm like, I should sit down and
I
do
think
nothing.
I think you need a vacation. That's what I'm hearing. Like I think that there's like the equivalent to the white padded room that maybe you could
Yeah.
achieve just like, at a resort or something.
Yeah, it's the idea of seeing a serial killer behind bars that I was like, God, he's living the life. And it's like, only if, like, what crime will guarantee me my own thing, but also they'll leave me alone. I got all the books. They bring in his meals, private toilet. I mean, sure, if someone walks in, they're going to see me shit, but like no one's walking in because they're terrified of me.
What I'm hearing is you'd like some time to be left alone to read on the shitter, and I respect that
Ah,
fully.
I think what I'm hearing is like, God, book yourself a weekend at a hotel, lady.
Yeah, again, like I do feel like when we log off, we'll have a real talk conversation here where it's like I think if you're fantasizing about being locked up against your will because it sounds nice to have a break, like I think we can maybe do that at your will, for a couple nights.
It's such a joke that I don't even see it as against his will. Just he looked so calm and peaceful. Like we're not talking the second like Silence of the Lambs where there's like the sheet of
Plexi.
like the
Yeah.
plexiglass and then to transfer him somewhere he's in like the thing with the metal across his face. I'm not talking that. Like this. He never had to leave. He was just in these like cozy socks and his little feet were kicked up and I was like, God, he looks really comfortable. And then every once in a while a cop shows up with a real case file and is like, take a look at this and just tell me what you think.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
What I'm hearing is that you like the career of serial killer Hannibal Lecter. I mean, without having to do any of the killing. I get it.
Ideally. Ideally.
Yeah.
But just like don't bring too many case files.
Yeah.
Let her get some reading done, but like every once in a while you can bring bring a bring a case file. But yeah, that was my moment of like I should probably take a day off. I was like,
Yeah, I think so. I
yeah,
think it's
it's just
probably wise.
there was something about the socks that I was like, they look so cozy and just a full shelf of books. I just was like, do they let you have books in prison? And he's like, I don't like you asking me these things. Like, well,
I think
just
they
asking.
limit what the books can be. I think there's limits on the books.
So like smut is yes or no?
Well,
Because if smut's not allowed,
I don't know if smut's allowed, but
then
you know
I
where it is allowed? At a hotel that we check you into, that we pay for ourselves.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I may have to consider that
Yeah, you
before
know what?
I consider crimes.
I'd be happy to send you an Uber Eats gift card and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
take some of those smut books, get a room and lock yourself up for 46 hours. 46. I don't know where that number came. 48 feels like the proper amount of time.
What I love is 2 full days. Ugh, that seems like a lot. Let's make it 46.
Let's give you 46
Yeah.
hours
Well, I
in the
got to
clink,
check out at some point.
you know? Yeah, put her in the clink for 46 hours,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, again, I hear you. I hear you. And,
Yeah.
and look, yeah, have I already brought up Trump saying he wants to take over Canada twice? Sure, I have. Is it on my mind? I guess the point is yes. I think it's on all of
Yeah.
our minds, all of the Canadians' minds,
I think
you
so.
know? And we don't really typically like get super into politics on this show, obviously. And to me, I don't think that this is politics. That's the thing. Like, to me,
Sure.
this is not a political issue. This is not conservatives or liberals or Republicans or Democrats. This is just cuckoo bananas. That's what it is.
Let's
It's absolutely unhinged. And
leave our country
if
alone.
you're somebody who doesn't live in Canada and you don't understand why it's unhinged, um, I don't know how to explain it. It's just absolutely it's nuts.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
nuts.
I at that hockey game last night there was an American gentleman who got upset with a Canadian gentleman because he had a sign that said, "Hey, US, how about you be our 11th our 11th province?" Think
Right.
about it.
Right.
I mean, the aboot really got me. And the guy was losing his mind. It was like, how dare you?
Right.
And I'm like,
Well,
well,
yeah.
we're legitimately being threatened with with that.
Consistently, constantly,
If
with
you'd
no
prefer America, you could be a territory.
yeah.
But here's the
Yeah, and
thing,
I
we
guess
want you to be your own country. And
yeah,
we
we
want
don't.
us to be our
To
own
be our own
country.
country, and that's yeah.
We can be bunk beds. Like you're the country down there, we're the country on over here, and that's it.
Well, just I would argue, the way it's been since 1867.
I like that.
You know, Canada became its own sovereign nation in 1867.
Oh, I had no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think again, like if someone heard, oh, Canada said America should be the 11th province and they felt upset by that, then I would say you should.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should. So therefore, you got to respect that we don't love being told that we could become the 51st state. We're not interested. Why would we be?
No.
Just like you wouldn't be interested in becoming Canada. Maybe you would. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. We'd
It's
like
just
to.
lunacy. It's lunacy.
Yeah.
It's like again, it's like what is this even accomplishing? It's
It's nothing.
crazy.
We
No.
want to be our own country. We want you to be your own country. Like,
And we
let's
want to
just
continue.
let's just keep it the way it is. Move on with our lives.
Yes, if it ain't broke.
Yes.
Ah, it's unraveled me.
Yeah, I get that.
It's
Maybe
unraveled
somebody
me.
else needs a weekend in a motel, in a hotel. Yeah.
Look, well, speaking of travel,
Yeah.
so I got a bit of a pet peeve. I got a bit of a
Mm.
I got to share an annoyance that happened to me this past week. Um, so I was in Toronto, Canada, as everyone who listens to this show knows. I was doing my wonderful anti-Valentine's Day concert up there. It's time for me to come back to the United States, to LA. Fine. I'm flying with a little airline called Air Canada. Now, spoiler alert, there's a real kind of like, there's not a lot of options to fly direct from LA to Toronto. You can't fly direct with WestJet anymore. If you're flying with United, it's actually an Air Canada flight. End of options. Literally. You can fly Porter now, direct from LA to Toronto. That's new. And guess what? Maybe I'll be exploring my options with Porter. If Porter Airlines wants to partner with us in some way or partner with me, I'd love to hear more about what they may have to offer after my experience I had this week. So basically, what happens is I get back to LA and I'm waiting. My bag doesn't come out, and I'm like, ugh, I've been through this before. I look up my air tag that I have in the suitcase.
Of course.
It's in Toronto. The bag never made it. Fine. So then I'm like, all right. Well, I look on the app and I notice on the Air Canada app the ticket number, like the bag tag number that is listed, is not
Yeah.
the same number as the bag tag sticker receipt that was stuck to the back of my passport. The two numbers didn't match. And I was like, that feels like a problem. So I'm
Yeah.
going to go into the little room here with the baggage person and just bring this up. So I say to him, hey, these numbers don't match. And he goes, oh, the tag must have gotten ripped off of your bag and they just put a new one on. Happens all the time. And I was like, really? Okay.
Okay.
He's like, file a report, file a missing bag report online. Okay, so I do. But it just didn't sit right with me. So I decided, I was like, I think I'm just going to call and follow up about this. I sit on hold for 2 hours, without exaggeration, 2 hours. I get through, I explain the situation. The person doesn't really have any additional information for me other than providing me with a link that I can watch up to the second updates about my bag, about
Sure.
where it is and what's going on. Fine. So the next day I'm watching this and it's still saying that they're looking for it in Toronto. They're looking for it in Toronto. But then I go over to my AirTag and my AirTag's moving around the airport. Then I check, it's in Iowa. Then I check, it's in Arizona. Then I check, it's in LA. So I'm like, all right, somehow the bag made it back. But this whole time, the Air Canada app is still saying they're searching for my bag in Toronto. So I see that it's in LAX. And I'm like, well, what's the timeline here? Like, it's been there for hours. Like, what's going on? I guess I should call and ask. I wait on hold for another 2 fucking hours. I get through. The guy's like, yeah, I really don't know. I don't know what to tell you. You don't know what to tell me. I said, okay, well, like, my AirTag is saying it's there, but your system is saying you haven't even found the bag. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's a problem with the system. I was like, okay. When should I be getting a phone call? Because they said, we will bring the bag to your home.
Of course.
Great. When should I be getting a phone call about that? 24 to 48 hours. I was like, can I just go to LAX and get my bag? And he said, yeah, if you want. So at 8 o'clock at night, I get in my car. I drive an hour to LAX. I walk into the little baggage room. I say, I'm here for my luggage. The woman says, what does the bag look like? I turn, there's my bag sitting right there in the room. And I said,
Hey.
oh, that's my bag right there. And this ambassador of Air Canada, the front-facing person I'm dealing with, yells at me. You left your bag on the baggage carousel. I said, whoa, What are you talking about? I said, this bag's been lost. No, it hasn't. I'm sorry, what? She's like, if it had been lost, there would have been this special missing tag that's on there. There's not one of those tags on there. I said, I have no idea what's going on with the tags in your system. But
Mm.
that bag has been in Toronto until a few hours ago. Well, when did you travel? Yesterday. She's like, that's not possible. That bag's been going around on the baggage carousel for hours. So, first of all, I love that also my bag had just been unattended on a baggage carousel for anyone to take for hours.
Right.
Great. That's wonderful. Then I love that she took that bag off the baggage carousel, assumed that it was abandoned, and didn't bother to look at the luggage tag I have on there that has my name and phone number. Didn't think maybe give the number a call to say, hey,
Mm.
did you abandon this bag? None of this. So then I have to show her proof. Here's my passport. Here's my boarding pass from yesterday.
Sure.
She looks up the did you file a missing bag report? And I just went, of course I did. Of course I did. So
Mhm.
then she goes, well, we have a problem because the ticket number, the tag number of the missing bag and the tag number on this bag don't match. And I said, yes, I recognize that. And I said, one of your employees told me that clearly the bag tag had been changed, but that obviously hasn't happened. And she's like, well, I don't know what I can do here. And I'm like, can't you just give me the bag? I've shown you my identification. I have a receipt showing that I have that bag, that bag is mine. The ticket I
Right.
have on my boarding pass, the little sticker matches. What's the problem? And she's like, "Oh, well, I have to delete this report and, this is unprecedented," was kind of her vibe. And then I realized when I had checked in at the airport, because I have to go up to the desk, I can't do it online because I'm traveling with Bean. I go up to the
Right.
desk and she's like, "You're checking 2 bags." I said, "No, I'm not." And when I had checked in, the pre-check and I had only clicked one, she goes, "Oh, that's weird. It's showing that you have 2. I'll delete one of them." So there was tag A and tag B. She put
Mhm.
tag A on my bag and then meant to delete tag B, but deleted tag A, is what I'm
Got
assuming has
it.
happened. So as
Right.
of right now, days later, their system is still searching for a bag tag number on a bag that doesn't exist.
Wow.
So my PSA to all of you, dear listeners, is if you haven't already, put air tags in your fucking suitcases
Oh,
because
yeah.
they were treating my bag as though it had been abandoned, which means it could have gone to the island of misfit bags and then gone onto one of those auctions where we see the TikTokers that they go and they buy this unclaimed luggage and then they unbox it on TikTok. I mean, is that how I would have seen my belongings again potentially?
Oh,
I
I
mean,
mean, I could never. I don't want there's a 99% chance there's dirty underwear in that bag. Where am I getting
100%.
that? 99, but
I
like
don't think
I
it's a
feel like it's high.
99% chance, but listen, I say 50-50 for
At
sure.
least, right?
Yeah. But this is my question. And I also just want to say this woman never apologized to me for the inconvenience, never apologized to me for how she spoke to me. I got sent a customer survey from Air Canada. I wrote out everything. I gave them every detail. It's been days. I've not received anything back. And
Mm.
I'm sorry. I'm first of all, I'm glad the plane landed safely. We've seen
Of
planes flipping
course.
on runways. We've seen a lot of chaos. I'm very grateful that they got me home safely. It's crazy that I feel like I even need to give that caveat with all
Mm.
but with all of the air traffic incidents that are happening, I feel like I have to. Here's the other thing. I can give a large amount of grace to human error, to mistakes happening, to
Sure.
inconvenience. But here's the deal. I was very inconvenienced. I spent 4 hours total on hold trying to get answers from people, and then the only reason I even got the bag was because I followed my own system with my own AirTag on my phone and then had the gumption to go, I'm just going to drive over there and get it. Had I not done that, or had I just not had an AirTag in the bag,
Yeah.
I would still be thinking that it's lost in Toronto. So, all of that, again, I'm doing the job for them.
Yeah.
And again, even with all of that, I can give grace and say, these things happen. The only thing that matters is I got my stuff back. Everyone's safe and sound. I can happily have that point of view. But you know
Sure.
where it breaks down for me? Being yelled at. That's where it breaks down for me.
S-
It's never appropriate. It's never necessary. And how dare you shout at me when you have inconvenienced me? So not only am I having to give, like, And listen, I can also give grace. I don't know what this woman's day was like. Maybe she's having a terrible time. I can give grace for
Sure.
that too. But you know what it is? Is that in the moment, if she had said, I'm sorry, I've had a hard day, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't have spoke to you, anything, I immediately would forgive it. But it's
Yep.
the fact that this person shouted at me, made me feel like an idiot after I was already inconvenienced solely by their company, that I
Yeah.
think is gross. And I'll say
Yes.
it, as a Canadian company, Air Canada, it's not very Canadian not to say you're sorry. You know what
Thank
I'm
you so
saying?
much. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I was livid as I was leaving. Just again, so anyway, all of this is to say, we're gonna start looking into Porter, first of all. Second of all, um, put air tags in your bags. If you're an
Oh, yeah.
Android user, there must be an equivalent that you can get that can track. You could track your own stuff because I would hate for this to happen to somebody else. And I'm very
Yes.
grateful that again I was paying enough attention that I got my bag back because I had been in Canada, by the way, for almost a month. I had a lot of stuff in that bag, like all of my makeup, um, a breathing device that I use to like help with my singing. Like there was like things in that I can't put in my carry-on. Like there was
Right.
things in that bag that I was like, I really need these, and it's all replaceable. Everything is replaceable. Again, I can let go of all of that. But what I can't let go of is the rudeness because I just don't think there's
Oh,
any excuse. Certainly in a customer service position. Give me a break.
oh, to like, first of all, to be like, hey, I'm looking for my bag, and to yell at you, to be like, what have you done? When it's like, she didn't do anything. The moment that she realized what was happening, she should have gone, I'm so sorry. I should not have done that
Yes. And again,
in that moment.
I would not be telling this story right now if she had, because again, everybody has a bad day. Everybody gets pushed. I'm happy to give, all I'm asking for is
Sure.
just take accountability that you shouldn't have yelled at me. And then it was one of those things where, she handed me my stuff back. I said, thank you. She didn't respond. I said, have a great night. Didn't respond. And I was like, you asshole.
Hmm.
I didn't say
Hmm.
that to her for the record,
Of
but
course. Of
internally,
course.
I was just like, what are you getting out of this right now? You're just tripling down on trying to make me feel like shit?
Oh, it's still wild to me that it was, when did you fly in? I flew in yesterday. That's impossible.
Yeah.
And it's like, first, no, no, I
No,
did. And it's
I
like, it's
can
impossible
prove
that
it.
an airline screwed up and left a bag behind, because I've had that happen.
Well, here's what I'll say. I will say that what happened was unprecedented. It's not impossible, but it was definitely unprecedented because, again, it's weird to me that that bag just never made it onto the flight. And then it's weird to me that they just put it on a random flight.
Yep.
Like there was no record of that bag, which again, in the grand scheme of like security and all of these things, does feel alarming that it's like a random bag can just be floating around an airport unaccounted for and then make
Yeah.
it to another airport in another country and be unaccounted for there too. Like it's very odd that any of that happened. So again, yeah, unprecedented for sure. That's not normal. But to just assume the worst, to assume that I'm lying, when again it's like, and I said to her, I was like, I drove an hour to come and get my bag that you're supposed to be delivering to me, and I'm gonna have an
Yeah.
hour's drive home. Like I don't deserve this right now.
And thank God you went and got the bag.
Yeah, I don't think I ever would have seen it again, quite honestly. Especially considering it had been there for hours and she never called the number on the back. Like, I don't begin to understand what her workload is or what she's doing. When I
Sure.
went in, it was a ghost town. There's nobody in there. It was silent. Uh, I don't know what the press. I'd love to know what the protocol is. If someone has abandoned a bag on a baggage carousel and there's a luggage tag with the person's phone number on it, how is it not protocol to call that number and say, "Did you abandon your bag?" Something could have happened to that person.
Great call.
Maybe they had a heart attack in a bathroom, like between getting off the plane and getting to the baggage carousel. You don't know. But the
Sure.
idea that it's like, oh, you abandoned it, so therefore we have no responsibility to contact you? What?
Yeah,
And
that does
again,
seem next
I was
level.
never going to get a phone call saying, hey, when can we bring you your bag? Because again, since it didn't have this elusive missing tag on it, they didn't even bother to look it up. And even if they had looked it up, they wouldn't have been able to find that number in the system. There was no record of the
Right.
bag. The only record of the bag was
Oh,
what I had in my possession. It's
right.
cuckoo bananas.
Yes. Oh, it's insane. I mean, I just can't imagine. I mean, I can't imagine coming at somebody so hot, just immediately like screaming. But if I had, I just can't imagine, like, even if I'd been the nicest person in the world to them and been like, hey, what's the problem? And oh, I don't know how much I can help you. I would have still apologized profusely for the company, for,
Right.
their errors, nothing that I've personally done. Just, I apologize on their behalf for this whole mess and all of this kind of thing. But if it's like I snapped at you for something that you didn't even do, oh, I'm walking that back pretty fast. It's
Absolutely.
insane to think that she wouldn't.
Right. And listen, did I give attitude back? Absolutely. Only after I was met with, and it's very unlike me to give attitude back, but I was like, how dare you? How dare you? And I looked her straight in the eyes too. I was just like, what are we doing here? Like, why is this escalating? Because again, it's like I came in at a 0, she came in at a 10. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, I
It also
just,
wasn't like she was surrounded by 100 bags. There was maybe 5 suitcases in there. It wasn't like it was like, "Oh my
mm,
god, I've been drowning in bags all day." Maybe she had been to some point. Again, this is the other thing. Genuinely, I'm willing to give a benefit of the doubt, but I
sure.
don't give a benefit of the doubt if you can't say, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your
Yes.
inconvenience."
Well, and I'm so sorry for ripping your face off. It wasn't warranted, and you did nothing wrong.
No, again, I detectived my way back to my belongings, which again, that's the moral of this story more than anything is folks, you
Yeah,
got to look out for yourself. We cannot rely on technology that is run by corporations, um, for a multitude of reasons that
sure.
are and aren't their fault. Um, but yeah, get your if you don't have air tags in your suitcases, all I'm saying
Mm.
is you're it's only a matter of time. Not trying to fearmonger, but
Ah,
we got
oh,
to look out for ourselves.
yeah. I think it the first time I flew with an AirTag in my bag that it was like, well, that didn't work out. My bag didn't show up, and then I like panicked. But then I could see it on the app thing, and then thankfully they did find it. They put it on a flight, and I think they got it to me the next day. But
I listen,
I
I've had
mean,
my luggage lost many times over the years. I'm just one of those people, I guess, that is lucky that way. Um,
mm,
but I have there's always like they always immediately know like I think what was on my gut was right that I was like, how is it that no one seems to know where this bag is? That was what was didn't make sense. Typically they're like, your bag didn't make it, it's on the next flight. Like there's like a track, there's like a digital
right.
footprint of like every step the bag has taken. But it's like the bag never got scanned into any sort of system.
Mm. Look, if nothing else, what I love is that this led to you using the word gumption because
Yeah,
yeah, you've got gumption, and it always will make me think of the movie The Holiday.
there you go.
And that's a beautiful thing.
I like that we can bring anything back to Christmas.
I we really can. And I was also just gonna say, like, my brain goes gumption, The Holiday, Kate Winslet. Oh God, Lauren and Kate Winslet could play sisters. And then my brain jumps back and goes, don't forget Jude Law in The Holiday. And then I'm like, oh, he is daddy.
He is daddy.
It's from the movie.
Oh, right.
I don't think any of us forget Jude Law in the Holiday. Look, he's too quick to commit, but what a lovely man.
Yeah, we hope.
We hope. I mean, I know personally there was some stuff,
Oh, there always is.
but
There
his
always is.
character as a human, the character that's not real,
Yeah.
um, he He seemed like a right proper chap. That's where I went with that.
A right proper chap. Well, chim chim cheerio. On that note, what you drinking over there?
I just have the ends of a Slurpee that, yeah, I've been working on for hours prior to the record, which is unlike me.
That is unlike you. Interesting. Well, good news. I've been reunited with an old past lover, and that past lover is Kimmy C here
Oh,
in the
nice.
his house. We got my Kim Crawford Sauvignon Blanc. How beautiful. And then just some water in a True Crime and Cocktails water bottle.
I love that. That's my favorite water bottle that I own.
It's nice. It's nice. It keeps the beverage nice and cool. This is
It
not an
does.
ad, it's just a fact.
Yeah, it is one of my favorites. I mean, I use it constantly.
Here's a fun fact about me. I have a variety of different kinds of water bottles, but the
Of
only
course.
ones that I can really use are the ones that have the tapered mouths. The ones that have like a wide mouth, I every time I drink from it, I spill it all over myself. I think it's
Mhm.
because my mouth is quite small. We don't have to get into that, but it is just straight up.
You could have a
Again,
small mouth. You
I
have
have a
gumption.
small mouth. I have the gumption and of a small mouthed woman. Um, I once told a dentist, I was like, they had to do molds of my teeth, and I was
Oh,
like, you're gonna want to use the child ones. And he was like, I think it's gonna be fine. And I was like, okay, you're gonna want to use. All right, fine. They put the adult ones in. Long story short, it was so big, it I threw up all over two dental hygienists' hands because they were trying to jam it in there. And then they finally
mhm.
did. And it was just too big for my mouth. And yeah. And then I was supposed to get the molds done. And then I was supposed to have a cleaning done. And so I threw up all over them. And then I'll never forget, I said, I'm done now. And they were like, you're leaving? And I said, yeah, I'm leaving. I just threw up on two of you.
Mhm.
I'm out. My song is sung. To quote Johnny Cash, when your song is sung, your song is sung. And that's when my song was sung. Let me tell you. I
And
was
that
like, I'll rebook the cleaning. Thanks. I'm out.
and that is what we call advocating for ourselves.
Well, here's the thing. They had told me ahead of time they were going to do a scan that they didn't have to do the molds because I've had the molds before
Oh,
and I'm claustrophobic. They make me even more claustrophobic. They're like hardening around. Like I don't like them. But that aside,
mhm.
when I went in, they were like, oh, yeah, no, we need to do this. We can't do the scan. We need to do this. And I was like, first of all, that's false advertising. Second of all, but you know what I'll
Yeah.
say to this? Boy, oh boy, were they apologetic. It's more than I could say for Air Canada. They were like, we're so sorry. And I was like, it's fine. I would just like to maintain a scrap of my own dignity and leave. I don't want to continue to look at the women that I just barfed on. Is that allowed? You know?
Oh, me and dignity rarely meet, but me, dignity, and the dentist, absolutely not. Again, I go in with a plush meerkat that I squeeze for my anxiety to
Yeah.
the point where the dentist walks in and goes, yep, I recognize you from the stuffed toy. And I'm like, so I'm the only adult you probably see that comes in. Look, the meerkat's name is Kyle. And he's a lovely gentleman.
Look,
And
he's doing great work.
he's always there for me.
Wow. How beautiful. All right, let's get into the episode. We're talking the Luna Park fire. This, of course, was our January patrons poll pick over on patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails. Every month, our patrons vote for a theme or a topic that they'd like seen covered on this main feed of the show. And they chose a case involving Australia. That was the winner. And the Luna Park fire case, I believe, takes place in Australia. I don't know because I know nothing about it. But the good news is that the synopsis is going to get me and you up to speed right now. In the summer of 1979, the popular ghost train ride at an amusement park in Sydney, Australia, went up in flames. 30 people were trapped inside the burning building, and sadly, 7 did not make it out alive. Within hours of the blaze, police were quick to blame the entire thing on an electrical fault. However, the fuse box that police claimed was faulty was one of the only things to survive the fire. So, if the fire started at the fuse box, how was the box not completely destroyed? Does this mean that the fire started in another way and the police were trying to cover up the truth? If so, what is the truth? And just how far up the political chain does this cover up go? Christy Oxborrow investigates.
Now, I've got a disclaimer for us off the top, but it's a slightly unusual disclaimer from what we would regularly do. This episode may be more upsetting to some than usual, specifically due to the ages of the victims and the horrific manner of their deaths. I don't belabor. We hit it and run. But I wanted to put that trigger warning just in case, because the most of the victims were quite young, and I mean they died in a fire. So
Yeah, it's very sad.
again, we don't focus on it long. I just want everyone going into it with that uh, knowledge in advance. So Luna Park is a chain of amusement parks across the world. They feature various games and rides like roller coasters, carousels, fun houses, and bumper cars, which I learned are called dodgems in Australia.
That's charming as hell.
I am so unbelievably charmed by it. I'm like, well, now I wish ours were called dodgems because that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
The first Luna Park opened at Coney Island in New York in 1903. Since then, 87 locations have opened up around the world, including 2 in Africa, 5 in South America, 6 in Australia, 20 in Asia, 26 in North America, and 28 in Europe. The oldest Luna Park still in operation is the one in Melbourne, Australia, which originally opened in 1912.
Wow.
But the Luna Park we are focusing on today is the one that opened in Sydney, Australia in October 1935. The Luna Park, this specific Luna Park, featured a popular ride called the Ghost Train, where small cars or carriages holding 1 or 2 people were pulled along a 180-meter electric track. Doors would open and close as the cars went along the track, twisting and turning in the dark, while mannequins and paper mache monsters would pop out for a fun scare.
Ah.
The ride was mostly indoors, except for a small moment where the cars would go outside to a small caged area before turning back inside. It also featured a dragon's head, a Dracula, dancing skeletons, fake spiders, and an imitation fireplace. On Saturday, June 9th, 1979, Luna Park was busy as usual, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The crowd included Sue Manning, who was there with a youth group from Bankstown, a group of kids from Waverly College named Jonathan, Richard, Michael, Seamus, and Jason, and the Godson family, which included John, Jenny, and their young sons, Damien and Craig. The Godson family were on vacation from Warren, which is 500 kilometers or 308 miles northwest of Sydney. Jenny Godson said that they had saved up for the trip and had been looking forward to it for a long time because their kids had never seen the ocean. And I think that's beautiful. The family spent the night of June 9th at Luna Park. Shortly before 10 p.m., they were down to their last tickets. So Jenny and John asked the children what their favorite ride of the day was. Both children said the Ghost Train. So John and the 2 boys headed towards the ride, and Jenny went to buy ice cream. And the plan was she would go to the ride with the ice cream and they'd all meet up there. John and his sons let a group of people go in line ahead of them. Once they got to the queue, they said they were waiting for someone, presumably Jenny. Once the group went ahead of them, John and his sons then just got in line themselves and ended up going on the ride. 19-year-old Sue Manning was a youth group social director who had chosen Luna Park as the activity for her group that day. She went through the ride in a car by herself. About like 3/4 of the way through the ride, there's an imitation fireplace that has this like cylindrical fan underneath some chicken wire that blows streamers upwards to kind of make it look like it's a fire. Sue said that when she got to that fireplace, there were actual flames in the fireplace. And she thought it was just kind of part of the ride. And she was fascinated to know like how it was working. So she kind of leaned over to get her hand close to it and realized just how much heat was coming off this fire that she thought was fake, to the point she couldn't touch it. Her hand immediately pulled back. It was so hot. The five school friends were nearing the end of their night at Luna Park. They planned to go on the Dodgems, but the ride had closed for the evening, so they chose to line up for the ghost train instead. Jonathan and Richard got in one car, Seamus and Michael were in the next car, and Jason was in a third car alone. Everything appeared normal, but once inside, people said that they started to smell smoke. They saw flames coming out of some holes in a wall before exiting the building into the caged area. And then when the doors opened to re-enter the ride, people noticed flames climbing up the full wall of the imitation fireplace. The flames and smoke got so intense that people started getting out of the cars and just tried to find their own way to safety in the dark. Because, of course, the only light inside the building was fluorescent paint. There were like actual lights, but they're not turned on when the ride is running. So nobody could see anything. And then the smoke started coming in and people started to panic and people just became trapped. People standing outside the ride started to notice thick smoke coming out of the ride. And soon empty cars started to exit the ride completely on fire. The bystanders started screaming to the operator to stop the ride. Steve, the ghost train operator, was told the ride is on fire, but in that moment, he didn't really understand what was happening, so he let Seamus and Michael's car enter the ride. And
Oh,
just as Jason's car kind of started to lurch forward, Steve realized that something was seriously wrong, so he stopped the ride, grabbed Jason, and hauled him out of the car and away from the ghost train entrance. 30 people were on the ghost train when people first started seeing smoke coming out of the building. The fire grew quickly out of control. A Luna Park employee named Frank Boitano grabbed a fire extinguisher, but he said the blaze was so intense, the extinguisher was about as useful as a water gun. Tony Jacob, who took tickets at the ride, grabbed a flashlight and ran inside to help get people out. He said the smoke made it nearly impossible to see or breathe, but he said he got out as many people as he could. Tony said at one point he could see John Godson and his sons trapped in the fire, but Tony physically could not get to them. I'd like to point out Tony was about 16
oh,
at the time.
bless.
Of the 30 people trapped, 23 managed to get out before there was a loud bang and the entire ride exploded in a massive fireball.
Whoa.
Tony, along with two passengers named Kate Partington and Ralph Sciano, were given commendations of bravery for their efforts to save people during the fire. Firefighters arrived on scene and described it as one of the most ferocious fires they had ever seen. By the time the fire was put out, it was discovered that 7 people had lost their lives, including John Godson, Damian Godson, Craig Godson, Jonathan Billings, Michael Johnson, Seamus Rahilly, and Richard Carroll. A coroner later determined that all 7 died from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and severe burns. Now, this is the part that's going to get tough. We're just going to get there and we're going to go on. John Godson was 29 at the time of his death. He was described as kind and gentle. Damian Godson was just 6, and Craig Godson was just 4.
Ugh.
Investigators said that based on the position of the bodies, it was clear that John had tried to shield his sons. Jonathan Billings was described as sensitive with a great sense of humor. His dream was to go to Africa to take pictures of animals. Michael Johnson was described as caring, smart, and protective of his younger siblings. It was said everyone loved him. Seamus Rahilly loved rugby and sailing and was protective of his friends. He was described as always smiling. Richard Carroll was described as a delightful child who excelled at swimming and school. The 4 friends would later be referred to as the Waverly Four because they all attended a Catholic boys' school called Waverly College. They were all in year 8 and just 13 at the time of their deaths. Now, I did watch an Australian documentary on the case when I was researching. It came out in 2021. It's called Exposed: The Ghost Train Fire. I do believe it is currently on Netflix somewhere. And usually, when I watch a documentary that's linked to an episode, I tell the dear people about it, usually before the episode comes out, and recommend it if they're looking for background before our episode comes out. Sometimes I watch a documentary that I don't recommend because it was bad or poorly done or
Of course.
angered me, and made me send Lauren hours of voice notes just spitting fire about these.
It happens.
This one, I mean, in this case, the documentary was very well done, and I would recommend it. But before I do, I just wanted our dear listeners to know it is a very tough watch. And I was going to post about the documentary and I was going to put a blurb and mention that it's a tough watch, but I'm like, no, no, I need people to hear it is a very tough watch. Hearing a parent who has lost their child say, "This is my fault, I should have been there," is a level of heartbreaking that I can't fully describe, not just as a mother, but as a human being. And watching Jenny Godson break down as she talks about losing her entire family in one instant, I believe her quote was something along the lines of, "I saw my whole family incinerated before my eyes."
Oh God.
And then there's Jason Holman, whose 4 best friends were killed in the fire. He was 12 at the time that that fire occurred. In the documentary, Jason's intense survivor's guilt is so heartbreaking, especially when you know he was pulled to safety just seconds after his friends entered the ride. So if you have an interest, I recommend it. It is, again, very well done, but it is a tough watch. Like, it is. I can't stress enough how tough it was. There are quotes from it, like, "I still hear the screams."
Oh God.
And so there, and hearing somebody say that as their voice is cracking is something that's gonna stay with me. So just I really wanted to give that disclaimer before anybody goes near it because it is tough. Um, so as we do, we're gonna look at the timeline, of the fire. Investigators believe the fire started around 10:10 p.m. Firefighters arrived on scene soon after, but the blaze wasn't fully extinguished until midnight. At 2:30 a.m., investigators recovered 6 bodies. At 3:40 a.m., a crane arrived to help move some of the debris. 2 hours later, the 7th body was removed from the scene. At 6:30 a.m., workers were brought in to start just removing everything. At 3 p.m., just 19 hours after the fire started, lead investigator, Detective Douglas Knight, told reporters, quote, "We're satisfied that the fire was a result of an electrical fault within the building." Knight then released a statement to the newspapers stating, quote, "Our police rescue squad has now completed the search of the burned out remains of the ghost train building. Fortunately, we are now able to say that no more bodies have been found, and the number of victims involved in this tragedy remain at 7." I mean, obviously, they're not counting psychological uh,
Right.
wounds, but the statement also included, quote, "There is nothing suspicious about the origin of the fire. We now have 4 independent statements from people who say that shortly before the main fire commenced, they all saw sparks and flames coming from an archway of the ghost train building in the vicinity of the roof in the electrical wiring system." Sue Manning, along with multiple people from her group, described seeing real flames in the fireplace during the ride, but none of them said anything about sparks or that they saw flames near the roof. Investigative journalist Caro Meldrum Hanna, who created the Exposed documentary, said that police took 24 witness statements after the fire. Not one of those witness statements mentions anything about sparks. So it's fascinating that they claim they had 4 when it's like, well, where are those people?
Yeah.
If the fire was caused by some sort of electrical fault, how was there still enough electricity to keep the cars running on the track throughout the fire? And when Tony first entered the ride to try and help people, he flipped a switch to turn on internal lighting, which was still working. There are also exterior photos of the ride as it's on fire, and you can see the lights on the outside of the building are still on. So, to any electricians who may be listening, if an electrical fault has caused a fire, is there still enough electricity to power a ride and lights? Granted, there were 2 fuse boxes for the ride, one on the northern side and one on the southern side. Police said the fire started at the southern fuse box, and since the lights were allegedly run off the northern box, maybe that explains why the lights were on during the fire. But if the fire started at the southern fuse box, why is that specific fuse box the only thing that survived the fire? In photos from the scene, that southern fuse box has some damage, but for the most part, it's pretty much untouched, which is weird if that's where the fire started. If the fire started there and then traveled everywhere else, destroyed everything else, but then left the place it started, that just feels weird to me.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't seem strange, how about the fact that they cleared that scene pretty much immediately? Mary Carroll, whose son Richard died in the fire, visited the park on June 11th, less than 48 hours after the fire, and she said the entire site of the ghost train ride was gone. They'd cleared it all out. They
Hmm.
just had everything removed. According to a police officer who was interviewed years later, he said, well, typical protocol would have been tape off the area, sift through everything to find the actual cause of the fire, and place police officers at the scene to guard the area until the investigation is over. But none of that happened.
Interesting.
2 months later, in August 1979, there was a coronial inquest to determine the true cause of the fire. Multiple witnesses were asked to attend the inquest, but then most just weren't asked to testify while they were there, which feels like a real waste of everybody's time. A coroner suggested that maybe the fire was caused by a cigarette butt. However, none of the witnesses saw anyone smoking on the ride, which I'll point out is full of constant jerking motions. So, not exactly like a leisure cruise here. From what people have said, it's the kind of ride where you keep your hands on the handles the whole time because you're being thrown one way and the other, and in the dark. So, it just doesn't sound like something that would be easy to smoke during. Experts who examined the electrical system testified that while the possibility of an electrical fault can't be completely excluded, it was most unlikely that the fire occurred through electrical fault. So maybe electrical, but most likely not. In the end, the inquest stated that the cause of the fire cannot conclusively be stated. Well, yeah, especially now that any evidence has been
Yeah.
discarded because they took it out and it was gone. They didn't keep anything. They just took it out and that was it. So police said it was electrical, but then some experts said it probably wasn't electrical. So then where does that leave us? Well, the inquest suggested someone dropped a cigarette butt. But again, we'll never be sure. Uh, so was it an accident caused by a careless cigarette or faulty wiring? Or the other option was the fire set deliberately. The inquest didn't even entertain the idea that arson was a possible cause, and maybe that's because police were so sure it was electrical. Because if the police quickly ruled the fire to be an accident, even though there was possible evidence to suggest otherwise, that could mean that lead investigator Douglas Knight suggested an accident because he was covering something else. How do we know what the truth is when we're talking about a fire that happened nearly 46 years ago? In short, we don't. Unless someone set that fire intentionally and is now willing to come forward, we are never going to know what the actual truth is. Is it possible that in the span of a few hours, police were able to correctly identify the cause of the fire without having to sift through any of the rubble in any way? I guess maybe. But is it also possible the lead investigator was choosing to hide the truth to protect someone? If so, who stood to gain from the fire at Luna Park? Well, Martin Sharp, one of the artists who was commissioned by Luna Park to redecorate the park in 1973, he became rather attached to the park. When the fire first happened, Martin was convinced it was arson. So he spent the rest of his life investigating the potential arson himself. Ghost train survivor Jason Holman became good friends with Martin, and over the years, Martin shared with Jason his vast collection of research. Martin saved every single newspaper clipping about the fire. He got every police report, any kind of thing he could find. Martin also had over 200 cassette tapes, each full of hours worth of interviews that he had done with people involved and witnesses who were there and all of that sort of thing. At some point after Martin's death in 2013, at the age of 71, investigative journalist Caro Meldrum Hanna was given access to Martin's research so she could use it as part of her own investigation. Through police reports, they discovered that there was a witness named Greg Shard who said that while riding the ghost train that night around 10 p.m., he smelled kerosene.
Mm.
When asked how sure he was, Greg said, "I can 100% guarantee it was kerosene burning." Greg also claims to have seen real fire in the imitation fireplace. Greg was listed as one of the witnesses at the coronial inquest, but he was never called to testify. Frank Boitano, who was working at Luna Park that night, also told police he smelled kerosene near the ride, but they never followed up with him. Then we have 17-year-old Les Dowd, who was at Luna Park that night with friends. Les claims he saw 5 men standing near the ghost train and that he overheard one of the men say he spread kerosene inside the ride and lit it with a match. One of the other guys said something along the lines of like, "You shouldn't have done that, and come on, let's split." Around 11:30 p.m., Les returned to the youth refuge where he was staying, and he told Julie Borger, who ran the refuge at the time. Julie immediately called police. They asked Les to come in for an interview. He came immediately, so he was getting interviewed at 2:40 a.m. Julie was present for the interview. Les gave a very, very detailed description of the 5 men he had seen. I mean, we're talking their outfits, facial hair. He pointed out they were each wearing very specific earrings in one ear, and that one of them had like a star tattoo on his earlobe. So we're talking like very specific details. By 6 a.m., a wireless message was sent out by police to have them be on the lookout for people matching the descriptions that Les had given. But before you get your hopes up that this is leading somewhere positive, a few hours later, other police pulled that wireless message and then showed up at the refuge and asked Les to return to the station for a second interview. So he's barely been home to sleep, and they show up around noon to interview him a second time, this time by a different detective who refused to allow Julie in the room. This, of course, is illegal because Les was a minor at the time. But since Julie was only 22 herself, she didn't realize she had every right to be in there on Les's behalf. During the second interview, Les claims detectives threatened him and said, "If you don't change your statement, something is going to happen to you." Les agreed to change his original statement and claimed everything he had said the first time was untrue. Les was then charged with being a public nuisance, charged with a $100 fine, and given 12 months probation. Years later, Les claims he was pushed into changing his statement and is adamant that he did overhear men taking credit for burning down the ghost train. And of course, I don't know Les personally, so I couldn't say whether for sure he's lying or not. But his description was just so detailed that I just find it hard to believe he would be lying about it. And also, what would be his motive to lie? There wasn't a reward for information. He had nothing to gain by lying during that initial statement. And then there's the fact that Tina Shakeshaft, who was with Les that night, separately went to the police and told them Les had told her he overheard a guy say he set the ghost train on fire. And she personally heard another guy say, like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. And come on, let's split, which is, exactly what Les had said. So it's interesting. Her story is the same as Les, including, words that were said by other members of the group. When Les retracted his statement, Tina was re-interviewed, but she refused to back down. Later, she said she did feel intimidated by police during that second interview, but she refused to change her statement. She's like, I wasn't lying, so why would I change it? I mean, kudos. Alan Chappell, a staff superintendent at Luna Park, was interviewed by police around the same time as Les and Tina's first interviews. Alan describes seeing a group of 9 bikies, which for the non-Australians listening is Aussie slang for people in a motorcycle gang.
Bikies. I love it.
I'm so charmed by Aussie slang. I'm just charmed. Alan described the height, build, hair color, and facial hair of at least 3 men from the group, all of which matches the descriptions given by Les. And Albert Bessel, who operated the ghost train that night, said in his first police interview that a group of bikies went on the ride about 10 minutes before the first person yelled fire. Albert's physical descriptions of the men are the exact same as what Alan and Les had said. Elena Uhazi, there we go. Elena Uhazi and her husband Frank were both on the ghost train when the fire broke out. Thankfully, they were able to escape before the building exploded. But that night, Elena told police that she had seen multiple bikies getting off the ghost train when she was in the queue to go on. The interviewing officer didn't bother to write down the part about bikies in Elena's statement. And when Elena pointed that out, he told her they couldn't prove that it was bikies, so she should just forget about it.
Wow.
Frank told a similar story, but the interviewing officer didn't add bikies to Frank's statement either. Frank said police never followed up with him. For those keeping a tally at home, that means Les, Tina, Alan, Albert, Elena, and Frank all separately told police they saw bikies near the ghost train around the time of the fire, as did another Luna Park employee named Frank. So that's 7 people who saw potential suspects, and of those 7, only 4 were included in the coronial inquest, but none of those 4 were asked to testify. In a newspaper article published on June 14th, the lead investigator, Douglas Knight, stated police were looking for more firm evidence to support the accident theory, which is a weird way to publicly say we had other witnesses, but just not ones who corroborated our own theory. He was quoted as saying, quote, "We believe the tragedy was an accident. Nothing has come forward to suggest that any malicious act caused the fire." Apparently, 7 separate witnesses are considered nothing. So what's the deal with Douglas Knight? Why did he continue to push the idea that the fire was just an accident? Well, according to lawyers and other police officers, Douglas Knight was known as a fixer, meaning he allegedly altered, deleted, and changed any reports or evidence necessary to make a case go the way he wanted. And allegedly, sometimes Knight would fix things to go a very specific way for someone as a favor. Who would have enough power to make a police officer potentially cover up a crime? Well, allegedly, Abe Saffron. Who is Abe Saffron? Well, he described himself as a nightclub owner and property developer. However, there are allegations that Saffron was the head of an organized crime group.
Interesting.
with known connections to the Genovese crime family in New York.
Oh.
Mm. I mean, there is so much about Abe Saffron. We could easily do a full episode on him. But for now, let me just give you the basics. With nicknames like the Boss of the Cross or the King of King's Cross or simply Mr. Sin,
Wow.
Saffron has a long history of allegations, including illegal gambling, drug dealing, bribery, receiving stolen goods, extortion, and prostitution. He owned a series of businesses in the King's Cross area, including nightclubs and massage parlors. Between 1980 and 1982, 7 of his businesses were destroyed by fires. Thank goodness they were all so well insured. I'm sure that was just a lucky coincidence.
Mm.
Um, like how an inquest into those fires implicated Saffron as being responsible for at least 4 of them, but he was never charged, and the case never moved forward.
Wow.
Almost sounds like someone allegedly had a friend in law enforcement. Then there's the fact that Saffron is rumored to be involved in the disappearance of Juanita Nielsen. Juanita was a journalist who owned her own newspaper and believed in urban conservation. In the early 70s, there was a plan to redevelop a section of Victoria Street in King's Cross, suburb of Sydney. Most of the buildings in the area were considered historic, so a lot of people were against redevelopment, especially when a company wanted to come in, tear down a bunch of old buildings, and replace them with 3 45-story apartment buildings and a 15-story office building. In July 1973, Arthur King, who was head of the Residents Action Group against the development, was kidnapped and taken to a motel outside of town and held against his will for 3 days.
Jesus.
When Arthur returned home, he quit the Resident Actions Group and moved out of the area. In 1974, Juanita started publishing articles about her opposition to the development in her newspaper. People involved with the development met with Juanita to attempt to change her mind about the project, but she refused. One of the nightclubs in the area, called the Carousel Club, which happens to be owned by Abe Saffron, reached out to Juanita about advertising their club in her newspaper. Juanita agreed to a meeting, and on the morning of July 4th, 1975, she met with Carousel Club employee Eddie Trigg. After the meeting, Trigg claims Juanita left the club on her own. 3 days later, her purse was found discarded near a freeway 60 kilometers or 37 miles away. But as of this record, Juanita Nielsen has never been found.
Whoa.
In 1977, Trigg and 2 other Carousel Club employees were charged with conspiracy in connection to Juanita's disappearance. One of the men even admitted that the advertising story was a ruse to get her in the building because their initial plan was to abduct her and take her to people who wanted to talk to her. But he claims it just didn't work out and they didn't do it.
Mm.
The trial happened in 1980, where one man was acquitted. The jury was unable to reach a verdict on the other 2, so the next year there was a retrial. One man was convicted and sentenced to 2 years. But before the second trial for Trigg, he used a fake passport, fled the country. He was arrested a year later in San Francisco, extradited back to Australia, where he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years. In 1983, a coronial inquest was held regarding Juanita's disappearance. It was determined that Juanita had died on or shortly after the last day she was seen, but there was not enough evidence to show how she died or who was responsible. Juanita Nielsen was just 38 at the time of her disappearance. As of this record, her case remains unsolved. A former employee of Saffron's came forward nearly 20 years later to say she believed Juanita may have attempted to blackmail Saffron regarding the use of shoddy materials in his new development at King's Cross. This is a completely different story than what this employee had originally told police, but she said she lied in the first interview because she was scared of what would happen to her if she had told the truth. Of course, this is only one person's story, so from the best I can tell, no one has come forward to corroborate it. So really the only link to Juanita and Saffron is the fact that she was last seen at one of his clubs and the fact that she was against the development that he was doing. So do we think Saffron had something to do with Juanita's disappearance? I think it's more than possible. Again, last seen at one of his clubs and openly against the new development that he was really trying to make happen. Not to mention, Saffron was described as, quote, one of the most notorious, despicable human beings living in Australia. So that's not a great review. So I think it's more than possible that Saffron was involved, or at the very least knows what happened to Juanita. However, he was never charged regarding her disappearance. In 1987, Saffron was found guilty of tax evasion. He served 27 months in jail, which is nothing when you consider the illegal things that he is accused of being involved in. Again, I could do a full episode on the man, especially if I included his family, like how in March 2024, Saffron's grandson, David Saffron, was awaiting trial in the US following an alleged $25 million Bitcoin Ponzi scheme. He was charged with multiple things, including money laundering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Prosecutors claim that David allegedly created fictitious companies and then tried to get investors to put money into those companies by lying to them and saying he had created the apps for Uber and Snapchat, as well as wrote the security software that gets used by all US banks.
Wow.
Yeah, bold. When it came time for the investors to see returns on their investments, David would just kind of keep giving them excuses as to why he couldn't give them money. Like one time there was a website malfunction, and then one time solar flares were causing him to have to shut down his website.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. There was even a time where he couldn't pay them. And he was just like not in communication with them for a chunk of time. And then he came back and went, well, that's because I was in a coma.
Oh boy, here we go.
The truth was he was in police custody over the alleged scam. The trial still hasn't happened, but if convicted, David faces up to 85 years in
Right.
prison. David's father, Alan, was Abe Saffron's only son and the only child born in Saffron's marriage. He also had a daughter born to a mistress a few years after his son was born.
That tracks.
Yep. When Alan's mother died in 1999, Alan was the main beneficiary and stood to receive $5 million. But Saffron didn't like that. And they ended up in a lengthy legal battle, which ended with Alan taking an undisclosed cash settlement of less than $1 million. I'm fascinated by he's my main beneficiary. And then the husband comes in and goes, like hell he is. And the fact that he fought it, it's also like, you had money. Why'd you fight it? Let the kid have the money either way. When Saffron died in 2006 at the age of 86, he left $1 million to his daughter, $1 million to each of his grandchildren, 3 properties to his mistress. Alan received $500,000, but was told he only receives the money if he doesn't contest the will. Alan publicly complained about it. The will was made just 2 weeks prior to Saffron's death, and there was a whole thing about like, well, my dad told me in person he was going to change the will, and he was going to change it when he got out of the hospital, but he never got out of the hospital. So it was like, well, but my dad was a man of his word, so I know that's what he would have wanted. But he chose to not contest the will because he knew he'd get nothing. And I know what you're thinking. Family aside, Abe Saffron himself seemed like a sketchy dude. But what does that have to do with the Luna Park fire? I'm so glad you asked. Thank you for keeping me on task. So, a few months after the fire, the lease to Luna Park was up for grabs. And in November 1979, a company named Camingo bid to get the lease to Luna Park. At first, it looked like they were going to win until the government, who officially owned the land where the park was, ended up choosing a company called Harborside Amusements. After Harborside won the bid, they basically cleared out the park and auctioned off pieces that were considered historically significant. Artist Martin Sharp referred to the auction as Luna Park's funeral. But the park reopened in spring of 1982 with 100 new arcade machines that had been installed, machines that happened to belong to Abe Saffron. He didn't own Harborside. So then how'd he get so many arcade machines into the park? Machines whose profits go directly to Saffron and have nothing to do with the park, which is also a weird setup. Um, you would think the park would want a portion of that, but
Yeah.
they didn't get it. Harborside was run by, I believe, a set of brothers, Hal and Carl Goldstein, who also just happened to be Saffron's cousins. And the financial controller of Harborside was Sam Kaupter, who is Abe Saffron's nephew.
Mm.
So after the fire, Saffron suddenly had financial connections to Luna Park, and the public became very suspicious about the connection. So the New South Wales Licensing Commission looks into it, and they are like, yeah, we found strong links between Saffron and Harborside. And so they suggested a more in-depth investigation needed to be done. But then a year later, the commission suddenly stated there is no evidence available that Abe Saffron has any actual ownership in Harborside. Because, I mean, it's true, there was nothing on paper that linked Saffron to the ownership of the company. It just so happened to be owned by his family members. But this made the public even more suspicious, and rumors started that Saffron may have intentionally started the fire with the hopes of getting his cousins the lease to Luna Park, which I get is a wild allegation. They're basically saying this man killed 7 innocent people just so his cousins would have the opportunity to bid on the lease of an amusement park. If that was true, Saffron would have needed multiple police officers to claim the fire was an accident. Well, in 1985, the National Crime Authority, or NCA, did an investigation into the fire, specifically into the possibility of police corruption during the fire investigation. Well, apparently at some point, the police had put a wiretap on the phone of Abe Saffron's solicitor, Morgan Ryan. And according to multiple police officers who heard the tapes and personally typed out the transcripts, there was a conversation between Ryan and a high court judge named Lionel Murphy. During this conversation, the man allegedly spoke about the fire and said that Murphy and then Premier of New South Wales, Neville Wran, arranged for Harborside Amusements to win the lease of Luna Park as a personal favor to Saffron. Basically, they're saying a judge and a premier colluded to ensure the lease for Luna Park would go to Saffron's cousins. Again, a wild accusation, especially given the occupations of those involved. But the big question is any of this true? Because honestly, a judge and a politician colluding as a favor to a crime boss sounds like the plot of a movie, and not one I would necessarily pick because it doesn't sound like one that would involve any kissing, and I'm a sucker for romance. Although I would absolutely watch one that the politician and judge were in love, or it was a love triangle. I'd watch that. I would watch that movie, especially if you put Hugh Grant in it.
Of
Anyhow,
course.
for those who may be wondering, what happened to those wiretap tapes? Well, according to some police officers, they were ordered to shred the transcripts and destroy the tapes. Allegedly, half the tapes were burned, and the other half were put in a sack and dumped in the ocean 2 to 3 miles off the coast. Why did they go to such extremes? Well, according to the police who destroyed the tapes, they claim they were told to do so because Neville Wran allegedly threatened police officers with jail time if those tapes didn't disappear. So now we're in a position of, do we believe a handful of police officers or do we believe a former premier? The Exposed documentary really leans into the idea that Neville Rand and the judge Lionel Murphy were involved in covering up the fire. We know the two men were friends. Rand has stated that much in public interviews. The thing is, the documentary only brought in one person who could link Saffron with Rand. A former secretary claimed she used to see Neville Rand at Saffron's parties all the time. And I'm not saying this woman is lying, but no one else has corroborated what she said. No one else who's ever attended one of these parties willingly came forward and was like, I've seen him at those parties. And from the best I can tell, Neville Rand was very beloved by voters. He allegedly received 80% of the popular vote at one point. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that people would be angry. The documentary suggested that Rand had done anything corrupt. And honestly, there isn't any physical proof he was involved in either the Luna Park lease or in any sort of friendship with Abe Saffron. And as much as I want to believe a conspiracy because I'm usually quick to question politicians, I don't know what to believe here, if I'm being honest. There are, of course, those alleged taped conversations. Um, but since the wiretap was placed without a warrant, anything off those tapes would have been inadmissible in court anyway. But someone leaked the tapes to a reporter who printed transcripts in 1984. This led to the NCA investigation, which stated, yeah, the tapes were real, but the transcripts were too unreliable to be used as evidence, which is weird to be like, oh, those
Yeah.
tapes existed. Well, we can't trust what's said. It's like, okay. Also, at the time of the investigation, Lionel Murphy was terminally ill, so it seemed like the NCA was trying to tread very lightly for his sake. And then when Murphy died in October 1986, the inquiry just like faded away.
Mm.
The NCA concluded that the police investigation into the Luna Park fire was, quote, grossly inadequate, stating, quote, proper procedures were abandoned at a very early stage in the investigation. The NCA also stated the coronial inquest was ineffective. But judges and politicians aside, do we really think Saffron set the fire intentionally just to get a piece of the Luna Park pie? Some have suggested Saffron wanted the land where Luna Park sits because it was prime harbor real estate. However, if the fire was done simply to get the land, then why is Luna Park still in the same location more than 40 years later?
Mm.
To me, if the fire was set intentionally, it wasn't by someone who wanted the land. It was by someone who either wanted the park, which tends to be a pretty good moneymaker, or by someone who was sending some kind of message to whoever owned the park at the time. But what message? The park's lease was ending. It didn't seem like the current leaseholder planned to renew. Was the fire an attempt to scare off potential leaseholders? If Saffron was involved, why did he want the lease so much? Um, uh, I mean, it seems like his only thing in the park was putting in those arcade machines. So how much money was he making off those machines? Was it worth what happened? Unless the park was somehow used as a front to launder money. I mean, that's just me making assumptions about organized crime. And in that moment, I was like, oh God, I don't think I'd seen anything about Abe Saffron laundering money. So I literally Googled Abe Saffron laundering money. Um, uh, the internet says he absolutely did early in his career. I just don't know if he was still doing it in 1979. But if this is all true and Saffron was responsible for the fire, he endangered the lives of so many people and took the lives of 7, including children as young as 4. And for what? To make his cousins get the lease to a theme park? Some people have claimed that Saffron hired a few bikies to intentionally set the fire, but that they didn't expect anyone to get hurt. Well, why risk people at all? If you're going to burn something down, sneak in after hours and torch the place. I am not condoning that behavior either. I'm just questioning, why put people's lives in jeopardy at all if human casualties were not part of the original plan? Ghost train survivor Jason Holman says that as an adult, he was approached by a bikie who claimed that Saffron was responsible for the fire and that he had hired three Humpty Dumptys to do it. Humpty Dumpty, of course, is because that's the person who's going to take the fall. Again,
Brilliant.
fucking clever, right?
Brilliant.
Um, but then if that's true, why didn't those people get caught? Why go through the process of allegedly having the police help cover things up if you had the fire set up by a fall guy? Unless the fall guy was just a backup plan in case the cover up didn't work. But even if we take away the possibility of Abe Saffron being involved, I mean, I think at the very least we can agree there was definitely some level of police corruption during the fire investigation. Lead investigator Douglas Knight was adamant that he immediately knew the cause of the fire, and he seemed to refuse to look at anything that didn't corroborate his theory. There is also the fact that one of the officers working the investigation was Bill Allen, um, who was known for a bribery scandal. So there is that. The big question is, why would Knight, or Allen for that matter, purposely ignore the possibility of arson? Were they protecting someone? Were they simply lazy and just wanted the case solved quickly to appease the public? Again, I point out that Knight publicly claimed to have 4 independent witness statements, all saying they saw sparks before the fire, and yet not one of the 24 witness statements that the police actually took ever mentioned sparks. So then it comes back to, was the Luna Park fire a simple accident? An inquest doubted any excuse that blamed the electrical. Did someone drop a lit cigarette during the ride? I mean, it seems unlikely, but since the police immediately removed any potential evidence, we're never going to know. And while I question the motive for arson, I can't help but believe the fire was set intentionally. So many people separately claimed to have smelled kerosene before or during the fire. And since the fire spread so quickly and then fully exploded, does that add more weight to the theory that kerosene was involved? Would there have been an explosion if kerosene wasn't part of the equation? I had to Google it. Electrical hazards, equipment, and machinery can cause a fire to explode. So maybe it happened without the kerosene, but again, it would be so cool. I don't even know if they would have had the technology, but could they have like taken all the like burned boards from in and around the fake fireplace where people said they smelled kerosene? Could they have taken any of those and like tested it in any way for kerosene? That would have been something I would have liked to know. Again, if the investigators had taken the time to sift through that scene, they may have possibly found an answer as to what caused that fire. But instead, we are going to question that. At this point, it's been nearly 46 years, and we're no closer to an answer. After the fire in June 1979, Luna Park remained closed until May 1982. Over the years, the park would open and close a few more times, and in January 2021, the park installed 9 new rides. It was purchased by a new company in December 2024, and from the best I can tell, Luna Park remains open to this day. After the exposed documentary, the investigation into Luna Park was reopened in 2021, but since so much time has gone by, it's tough to say if we'll ever see a proper conclusion. In September 2024, a redacted police report was given to the families of the 7 victims. The information in that report has not yet been made public. Reporting for True Crime and Cocktails, I'm Christy Oxborrow.
Wowzer. What a story. My God. There's some real twists and turns happening here. Listen, let's grab a drink, hit the can, and we'll be back to discuss our thoughts, theories, feelings, and more on the Luna Park Fire episode of True Crime and Cocktails. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're, of course, discussing the Luna Park Fire. What a ride! What a ride. I have a lot of thoughts. First of all, how horrific. What a terrible story in
Yes.
terms of the loss of life. My God, it's horrifying. Um, it just feels like something's up, right? Like it's like it doesn't feel like it was an electrical fire, especially considering they were like it started at the southern fuse box, but that fuse box was fine.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm no electrician. I don't know the ins and outs of this. If you're a listener who's an electrician or perhaps knows an electrician, let us know in the comments what get the electrician's take on this. But my gut
Yeah.
is telling me there would probably be some evidence at that fuse box of
Yeah.
of this issue. Again, I understand the concept that if there's more than one fuse box, then maybe that's how the ride was still operating or the lights were still
Sure.
on. Like I can wrap my head around that. But to suggest that it's like, this is definitely where the fire started, there's absolutely no damage done to that place. It's like, that just doesn't feel like.
It does feel wild for that to be the first go.
And I think the big thing for me, and this is like the overarching thing I kept thinking about throughout this episode, was if if there is no conspiracy here, if there's no cover up happening,
Yeah.
let's say,
Sure.
what is the motive not to investigate it any harder? To your point, it's like, is it just sheer laziness? Because there would be no reason not to investigate it,
Right.
right? Like this was a tragic loss of life. Again, children involved. Like, why would you not be automatic? Like, unless, yeah, it just makes it feel to me like it's like, well, there's got to be something going on. Because to me, it's like you have that kind of a situation. Of course, you would launch an investigation to get to the bottom of what happened.
Right?
Yeah, it's like a public safety thing. Like, right? This was a public place where people, you know, this is going to rock people's confidence in amusement parks potentially. So there would be a need to get to the bottom of what exactly happened
Yeah.
to try and like not make people panic, you know? Um you said, was the fire started by a cigarette butt? And I wrote down it was 1979.
Oh, it is more than possible that someone was on that ride smoking. It's also more than possible that some random guy was like, you know, it would be funny putting real fire in that fireplace and went there with
Yeah.
the intention to do harm, not really thinking that anything big would happen, but then just being like, huh, well, and then just never admitted to it.
Well, there is also like that was the only other, theory that I had written down was to quote Michael Caine as Alfred in Batman The Dark Knight, some men just want to watch the world burn. Like in this case, literally and metaphorically. Like I was like, okay, is this just misadventure for lack of a better term? Like
Sure.
it's the only other it feels to me like that's the only other possible situation, right? Like, but that's very dark. Setting
Oh,
a
yeah.
an amusement park ride on fire, like
Yes.
just for a laugh, like that's psychotic.
100%. I just
Um,
wanna know, like, is there somewhere, I mean, who's to say that they were always that those people that, like, kind of so many people, described, there's no way to say that they were specifically from the New South Wales area, but was there no way that police could have, like, even looked at mugshots or something? Because a tattoo on an ear
yeah,
feels
like
oddly specific.
a real definitive marker.
Yeah,
Yeah, just look into it.
yeah. Like, so many people gave you that same description.
Yeah, that's the thing that's again why I'm like, I don't understand the police's motive not to investigate that. I don't understand what that motive would be unless it's trying to cover something up. Like, it just doesn't feel like there's a logical reason if you have 7 witnesses who all have the same
Right?
story. Yeah, it's like it's harder to ignore it than it is to investigate it at that point.
Yeah. And why lie and publicly say you have four witnesses saying one
Right.
thing that you don't have any that said that?
And that's the thing, right? Like again, when we look at these things, it's like, well, it feels more likely that there's a cover up going, like again, like conspiracy, the simplest explanation is usually true. But again, when you have that kind of weird police work going on, it's like, well, there's no reason to lie unless you're trying to cover something up.
Right?
And who knows what that could be or not be. But like whether it's again Abe Saffron and that whole story, or if it's something
Mm.
else, like who knows? But like to me, it's like I think that if you're making up lies about witnesses and you're not following up on, like, then you're actively trying to cover something up. I don't think that's
Oh,
just
yeah.
lazy at that point, you know? Um, the fact that experts said that it was unlikely the fire was electrical. And here's the other thing. Let's say it's the 70s and there's a bon vivant, like we used to smoke on airplanes and smoke in shopping
Sure.
malls. Let's say somebody's on there with a ciggy hanging out of their mouth and they take a sharp turn and uh-oh, it flies out.
Sure.
How did this fire, like there would have had to have been an accelerant. I'm not saying that a cigarette butt couldn't have started some sort of fire. Of course it could have.
Sure.
But the fact that the fire escalated so quickly and you hear people
Mhm.
talking about that, like the witnesses talking about how it like became this
Mhm.
massive fire very quickly, that to the point that like you couldn't get in, you couldn't see because of the smoke. Again, I'm no fire expert. If there's a fire expert listening to the show, comment in the comments. But like,
Mm.
but I feel like that's also proof of an accelerant. It's in the name, right? Like, I'm not saying a fire couldn't break
Mhm.
out for any possible
Sure.
reason, but for it to spread that quickly to the point that people got trapped and couldn't leave and died, that's fast.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
This is an enclosed building. You know,
Yeah.
we're not talking about, the wildfires, for example, that we had here in Los Angeles, where we had 100-mile-per-hour winds. And guess what? That causes fire to spread very quickly. This is a contained building. I know there was an
Yeah.
outdoor element, but for the most part, like the fire started inside. So
Yeah.
again, it's like that's not like prime. That's not a prime situation for a raging fire to break out and destroy a building in mere minutes. That feels
Absolutely.
to me, again, I'm talking out my ass here. I'm only speculating, but that feels to me like almost proof that an accelerant would have had to have been used.
You
Or,
would think so, right?
yeah, or there's something else in there that made it go up super fast. Because I guess my other, and listen, I know this was the 70s, but like my perception would also be now, for example, at an amusement park, like I think there's probably like they're not using materials that are known to be flammable. Like I feel like there's
Sure.
probably protocols so that it's like, let's make this the least likely to catch fire.
Mhm.
Right? Like it's not like it's like, hey, you know what we should make this ride out of? Dry hay. Let's get some dry hay and
Sure.
you know what I mean? Like let's oil lamps. Like you know what I mean? Like it's like we're not
Yeah.
you're trying to use things that are going to be like, "Oh, this is a risk. Let's hope that today's not the
Right.
day." Like there's got to be. I just find it very hard to believe that even if there was something like a cigarette that got thrown, I find it very hard to believe that a fire would accelerate that quickly just on its
Right.
own.
Oh, 100%. There's something so
Seems
sketchy about that.
Yeah, it seems very unlikely. Um Again, I wrote down, yes, who stood to gain from this fire? Great question. All we're ever trying to do on this show, I feel like half the time, is look for motive, because at times it feels like, what the hell is, why would anybody do this? Like, what's the reasoning? It's interesting to me that if this was a legit arson, which was, you know, set up by Abe Saffron, for example, to get his
Sure.
cousins this bid. All right, we're just going to go there for a second. And they hired these bikies potentially to do the job. Why are the bikies talking to each other about it in the park?
Yeah.
Because I'm not saying that I think that those witnesses are lying. I'm not saying that. I believe them. I don't know why they would make up hearing people say I spread kerosene. Like I
Right.
don't know why they would make that up. I guess my question is, why was one of them telling the other, "Hey, I just set a fire," if they were all in on it? That doesn't make sense.
Sure.
And if they had done it, logic would denote that they probably would have left and not hung around. And if they did, logic would also typically speak to, let's not talk about the arson until we're back at the clubhouse. Like I just it feels like it's
Sure.
like so then that makes me go, were these professionals or was this we just want to watch the world burn? You know,
Sure.
because it doesn't feel like a professional hit if the people that did it are then immediately like hanging out in the park still talking about it. Like that just doesn't feel
Oh, 100%.
not impossible, obviously, but you know, obviously there's dumb criminals and they're not that dumb as they haven't been caught, but you know, um yeah, the fact that also there was, you know, two people that were like, "Yes, we absolutely smelled kerosene." Like, okay, then that makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that there was an accelerant used to make this fire go quickly. Um, I love the fact that this Tina gal never backed down and never changed her statement. I think that that's very brave of her and also speaks to me again that I do believe that these kids were telling the truth. I absolutely don't blame um I don't blame Les for changing his story. I mean, we've seen the videos of police intimidation tactics and false confessions and all of those things. So I no shade there at all. He was also a kid, my God. Um the fact that just so many people corroborated the same story, it just feels I think what always feels odd is that it's like how is there no governing body overseeing? But then when you bring in, well, maybe the premier of, you know, maybe someone in
Sure.
government is in on this, typically that would sound insane. But then you kind of go, well, that's how you get away with it without a governing body stepping in. If you
Sure.
how far up does it go? If you go up super far in the chain, then yeah, I guess you can get away with not really investigating things and ignoring witnesses and making up lies. If there's no checks and balances,
Yeah.
right?
Again, Abe Saffron had multiple of businesses of his go up in flames.
Yeah.
And an investigation was like, this needs to be looked into because he looks really sketchy for this. And then that just disappeared. I mean, he
Yeah.
had to have friends somewhere to make that work.
Right. And also the commonality of the fires that it was like he
Mm.
was collecting this insurance money from these fires and then another fire was set. It feels like that's also a, you know, clue. Um the bit about his grandson being arrested for this Bitcoin scandal, um claiming to have like created all these great technologies. I just
Of
wrote
course.
down maybe those investors should have checked his LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Like,
there
if
has.
somebody's claiming to have, like, done incredibly high level work, like, I
Mhm.
mean, no shade, but also, like, I don't know. Much like
There.
I'm recommending AirTags. If you're gonna invest, you know, millions of dollars into some
Mhm.
sort of meme coin situation, maybe just, like, double check that the guy's legit, you know?
There's got to be just like a quick Google who made Snapchat,
Yeah, like, that's
you
a
know?
question that you can get answered really quickly.
I
But,
also
you
love
know
the specifics of Snapchat and Uber, where his
yeah,
like the first thing he thought of like what's a popular app.
right.
But he was like, I
Completely
can't.
different technologies also. It wasn't
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I created Postmates and Uber Eats." That I could get yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Same thing. I
Yeah.
created DoorDash and Uber. Yep, same
Mhm.
technology. That makes sense. No Snapchat. It's like, well, well, I'm not suggesting that developers can't develop different things, but you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
It's like, yeah, you
Oh,
just really you've thrown a dart at a board and chosen two things.
it
Um,
just feels like he's like, what's popular social media? Well, it's easy to know I didn't do Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
great point.
So then he was like, well, what's one nobody knows? Because I doubt anybody knows off the top of their head who dealt with Snapchat. I barely
No,
know what
exactly.
Snapchat is.
I don't trust Snapchat. Never have. Um, then the specific, he faces 85 years in prison. And then I just wrote down, hey, remember Hawk Tuah?
Yeah.
Remember that? Remember
Yeah.
how that blew up and she was getting so much money from her podcast and then she created that meme coin and then got arrested for the insider trading and now faces, I think, probably a similar prison sentence.
Yeah.
That happened so quickly.
So fast.
Anyway, um, yes. So kind of the final thoughts I had written down were like, what would any other motive be? To your point, it's like, did Abe Saffron want that land? But then that land remained the park until current. So that doesn't feel like it was what it was. Um, was it all about the arcade machines? Like, how much money are you making from those arcade machines? I like that you're like, was it money laundering involved? Because that starts to make more sense. I think the thing that really doesn't make any sense to me is what really stood to be gained from that fire. To your
Yeah.
point, to the point that it's like you did it during operating hours and children died.
Yeah.
Okay, so what? So their cousins got the bid and got the park? Like, is that imperative, impressive? Like, is that much of a moneymaker? I just can't believe that to be true because you've tarnished your own brand immediately. If you want to take over running an amusement park, it's not great press that that amusement park recently had a fire that killed children.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Like, it's a really flawed logic if that was the intention. If it was a money
Yeah.
laundering scheme or something like that, we're starting to make a little bit more sense because, but even still, it's like, wouldn't you want a thriving business that you can hide behind? Like, I don't know that the attendance to that amusement park is going to be through the roof in the years following this terrible tragedy. Like,
Yeah.
it's just a really bizarre. Yeah, if it had been the middle of the night, no one was there, no one got hurt, which is a lot of arson, as we know, is,
Sure.
insurance, fraud and stuff like that. It just feels very odd to me. But again, then I talk myself in this circle where I go, but if there wasn't something getting covered up, there's absolutely no reason why this shouldn't have been investigated. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a snake eating its tail. Like it's like I just continually talk myself in the circle. And again, then the only other explanation is I set a fire to be a badass, to be a bad person, to
Right.
like that's the only other possibility. Unfortunately, we've always lived in a world where that is a possibility. But again, then it doesn't make sense why the land was cleared so quickly, why it was never properly investigated, why all the protocol were missed. So I'm back in this circle, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
nothing adds up. There's no answer that adds up. And at the end of the day, nobody benefited from this, really.
Correct.
I mean, your 100 arcade machines, all right, those are what, 25 cents a play? Like, how many quarters are you bringing in to make this worth your while?
Right.
And I'm not suggesting that people involved would necessarily have a normal conscience. I understand that we're dealing with crime families and whatnot, like, but even crime families have certain standards. Like, you don't kill kids. Like, that's, you know,
Sure.
the Iceman, I believe there was like that, he had
Right.
rules where it was like, I will never kill a kid. Like it's not happening. And I think he also, if I may be wrong, but I think he also said women. Um,
That's actually
there's
kind
still
of nice.
there's still standards is the point with a lot of like those types of groups, right? So again, what are we talking about here? I understand that there's also, when we think about different kind of arson situations or you know, bombing situations or whatever, there are times where it's like people are trying to make a terrible political statement of some time, but there is also just like creating chaos, creating destruction, like that is a thing.
Sure.
Um, I guess in a sense that would be the simplest explanation, but then I get back on that hamster wheel where I go, But then why not investigate it? There is no motive for those police to not investigate this fully other than cover up. Period. And then of course I know that we have these tapes, these wiretap tapes, of course, that are seemingly damning even though could never be used in court.
Right. And then I'm just like, if you had the tapes, what I wouldn't have given for someone to be like, totally put it on fire. And it's like, and by fire, I mean it's in a thing hidden in a room. Like
Right.
I've taken it and put it somewhere.
Yeah.
Would I try and hide the tapes that I was told to destroy? Maybe.
I could see that if it was like we knew that it was this all of this where it's
Oh
like
yeah.
children died and shit and it's like you're complicit in hiding covering it up. I think I could see myself being like, I'm going to risk it.
Just like a tape down the front of your top, and then you're just walking out with it, but hidden in your tits. And then
Yeah.
you get home and you know, put it in some sort of safe place
Right. Or you
until,
mail it to a newspaper like, the
oh,
Zodiac killer. Only
sure.
the opposite because you're doing it for good, but you know what I'm saying.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah, I mean this is really, again, so tragic, so sad, but also like very fascinating because it's interesting again that this happened so long ago and there's still no real answers. Even though there was lots of witnesses, there's all of the evidence was destroyed.
Yeah.
It's
And the families, it's so sad because in the documentary, they were asked, like, did you ever have doubts that it was an electrical fault? And they pretty much all went, no. I thought, like, I believed what the police told me because they're the police.
right.
They were like, we never would have considered any other option.
Again, it just feels electrical fire. It almost would have made more sense for the police to say like, "Oh, it was a cigarette butt or whatever." Like the electrical fire
Right?
thing, it's like again, I'm like, so wait, so you're telling me that and I get that it was the 70s and maybe the technology isn't where it is now, but like I don't know that there shouldn't be a lot of prep for that. Right? Like if it was possible
Yeah.
for like, oh, a fuse blew and then uh-oh, the whole place burned down. Like it's like that's I get that electrical fires can happen, but it just feels like when you're dealing with an amusement park where you're bringing in a lot of people and a lot of those people are children, just feels like the safety standards have to be top notch.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why don't we hear about this happening all the time? I have
Fair.
not heard any other stories, and I'm not saying that doesn't mean they haven't happened, but it's not like you hear like, oh, you know, this amusement park, another electrical fire. Like I don't feel like you hear stories
Right?
about people getting trapped on rides, about you know
Yep.
what I mean? Like you got trapped upside down for 6 hours or some shit, or people need to go get rescued off something. I don't feel like you hear a lot of story. There isn't even things about like restraints not working or something malfunctioning. I just don't feel like you hear about a lot of amusement park electrical fires. I feel like again, it's like that's like something that has to be constantly maintained to avoid
Yeah.
an electrical fire.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
I mean, confounding, and so sad.
Again, I don't normally give such a lengthy warning before I tell people this documentary was really good if you want to watch it. But just know, like, it's, yeah. Because I just thought if I put it up there and I put in the caption, like, just be careful, like, it's hard to watch, I'm worried someone's just going to see it and go, that's the next thing I watch, and not read the synopsis and then be like, that was tough. I didn't want to watch that. I'm like, I just want them to know.
Listen,
It's
you're
brutal.
protecting
It's
you're
brutal.
protecting everybody, and we thank you for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, listen, fantastic work as always. 12 out of 10. Very tough subject matter, but again, a fascinating story by far.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, except for that documentary that broke my heart for, oh God, I don't know. 4.5 hours, almost 5 hours. Aside from that, it was fascinating.
Well, listen, we thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this tragic ride. If you haven't already, give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at True Crime and Cocktails. On X, I hate even saying it, at Not Detectives. If you'd like some bonus content, go over to patreon.com/, True Crime and Cocktails to learn more about our subscription-based service over there. And of course, the only place for official True Crime and Cocktails merch is, of course, truecrewmerch.com. So check that out as well if you're interested. Christy, do you want to tell the people about next week's episode?
On the next True Crime and Cocktails, Templeton Woods murder.
Oh, I have know nothing about this case. I look forward to learning about it from you. Christy, do you want to say goodnight to the people?
Good night, Team Canada.
Yeah, good night to the hockey boys.